The Chardonnay was over-chilled, the kind of cold that makes the glass sweat enough to slip through your fingers if you aren't paying attention. I held mine with both hands, watching the condensation bead and roll, tracing a path down to the linen tablecloth my mother insisted on for Sunday dinners. Victor was across from me, his face slightly flushed from the second bottle of Napa Red he'd been working through. He was laughing at something my father had said, a loud braying sound that always signaled he felt he was the smartest person in the room. Usually I'd find a way to pivot the conversation back to something grounded, something involving the logistics of the family firm or the latest shipping delays at the distribution center. Tonight, I just watched the water on the glass. "It's about the optics, Dad," Victor said, leaning forward. He didn't look at me. He hadn't looked at me since the appetizers were cleared. A company like ours, a luxury brand, we can't have the gears grinding in public. Efficiency isn't just a spreadsheet metric, it's a reputation. If the back end looks sloppy, the front end looks cheap. My father nodded slowly, cutting into his steak with the precise, rhythmic motions of a man who measured his life in quarterly dividends. "I've always said the foundation has to be solid. If the foundation cracks, the house doesn't just lean, it falls." "Exactly," Victor said. He finally glanced my way, but his eyes didn't linger. They skipped over me like I was a piece of furniture he was thinking of replacing. "And sometimes you have to cut the rot out before it spreads to the joists. It's hard, it's unpleasant, but it's necessary for the long-term health of the estate." I took a sip of the wine. It was tart and hollow. I've spent 12 years as the senior logistics planner for Norton Luxury Retail. I know every pallet, every manifest, and every regional hub from Maine to Florida. I've lived in the data. Victor, on the other hand, lives in the cloud of executive sales, a world of handshakes, expensive lunches, and vague promises. We were two different animals in the same cage, and for a long time, I thought that was a balance. I thought my quiet competence was the anchor for his loud ambition. "I'm glad we're on the same page," my father said. He laid his fork down with a finality that made the crystal chime. "I was worried you'd be too close to the situation to see it clearly, Victor. But you're right. The recent performance gaps are unacceptable. If a branch is failing, you don't keep watering it. You prune it. We'll adjust the legal filings by the end of the month. No sense in leaving the future of the company in hands that can't hold a pen." The air in the room didn't change, but my perception of it did. It felt heavier, thicker, like trying to breathe through a wool blanket. They weren't talking about a regional office. They weren't talking about a third-party vendor. They were talking about the will. They were talking about me. Victor had spent the last 6 months whispering about performance concerns and logistical oversights that I knew didn't exist, and he had finally whispered them into the right ear. I looked at my mother. She was busy adjusting a centerpiece of dried flowers, her eyes fixed on a stray petal. She wasn't passive because she was weak. She was passive because she had already chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. She'd always preferred Victor's noise to my silence. Noise sounds like success to people who don't want to look too closely at the details. "The transition needs to be quiet," Victor added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial pitch that he knew I could hear perfectly well. "No drama, just a realization that some people are better suited for less demanding roles somewhere else." "Agreed," my father said. He looked at me then, but there was no warmth in it. Just a cold, professional assessment. "Caleb, you've been quiet tonight. Anything on your mind?" I looked at the glass in my hands. I could have started a fire right there. I could have brought up the record-shattering efficiency of the Q3 rollout, or the fact that I'd saved the firm 6 figures in overhead by renegotiating the freight contracts Victor had nearly fumbled. I could have told them I knew exactly what they were doing. But in that moment, a strange, icy clarity washed over me. It was the same feeling I get when a complex routing problem suddenly clicks into place. The realization that the shortest path between 2 points isn't always a straight line. Sometimes, You have to let the cargo travel in the wrong direction just to see who tries to steal it. Just thinking about the supply chain, Dad, I said, my voice as level as a horizon. It's amazing how one small break in the link can ruin the whole delivery. You think you have everything tracked, but there's always a blind spot. Victor smiled. It was a thin, triumphant expression. He thought I was conceding. He thought I was admitting defeat without even putting up a fight. That's the problem with being a gearhead, Cal. You're so busy looking at the links you forget to look at who owns the chain. I smiled back. It wasn't a friendly smile, but Victor was too intoxicated by his own perceived victory to notice the difference. You're right, Vic. I should definitely pay more attention to ownership. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite, hollow conversation. We talked about the weather, a new country club membership my father was considering, and Victor's upcoming trip to the coast. I played my part. I was the dull, slightly incompetent younger brother who had reached his ceiling and was now beginning to crack under the pressure. I was the disappointment they had already decided to move on from. It was a comfortable role for them to cast me in, and I played it with a dedication that would have won awards if anyone was paying attention. When I finally stood to leave, I shook my father's hand. His grip was firm, the grip of a man who had already settled his accounts. "We'll talk soon, Caleb," he said, "about the future." "I look forward to it," I replied. Victor walked me to the door, his hand heavy on my shoulder, in a gesture of false solidarity. "Don't take it too hard, little brother. Not everyone is built for the executive suite. There's no shame in finding a slower pace. Maybe something in the suburbs, a nice little consulting gig." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, stepping out into the cool night air. The driveway was lined with expensive cars, symbols of a legacy I was supposedly no longer fit to inherit. I got into my sedan, a reliable, boring vehicle that Victor mocked for its lack of status, and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. The drive home was quiet. My mind was already working, moving pieces around a board that only I could see. Logistics isn't just about moving boxes, it's about timing, leverage, and the management of expectations. Victor thought he had orchestrated a quiet coup. He thought he had used his influence to rewrite the family narrative and secure his place as the sole heir to the Norton empire. He thought I was a variable he had successfully factored out. He was wrong. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the dark for a moment. My house was silent. Maya was already asleep, or pretending to be. Our relationship had been strained lately, a subtle cooling that I'd attributed to my stress at work. Now I wondered how much of that stress had been fed to her by Victor. How many concerned phone calls had he made to my wife? How many times had he mentioned my erratic behavior or missed timelines over drinks I wasn't invited to? I went inside, bypassing the bedroom, and headed straight for the small den I used as a home office. It was a cramped room, filled with physical files and a high-end workstation that was better than anything the company provided. I sat down and pulled up my private cloud server. A few years ago, when the company transitioned to a new digital architecture, I'd been the one to oversee the migration. I'd set up the permissions, the backups, and the archives. I knew where the digital skeletons were buried because I was the one who had dug the graves. I had an old archived folder, something I'd kept more out of habit than necessity, a mirror of the internal routing logs from the previous fiscal year. I opened the file. It was a massive spreadsheet of commission routing data, a tangled web of numbers and employee IDs. I'd looked at it 1,000 times, but tonight, I wasn't looking for efficiency. I was looking for a ghost. I scrolled down to a series of high-value shipments from the previous summer. These were the deals Victor had touted as his biggest wins, the ones that had solidified his reputation as the golden boy of sales. I remembered the dates. I remembered being in the office late, fixing the shipping errors that had nearly sunk those very deals. I stared at the screen. There was a line of code, a simple redirect for the sales commission on a 7-figure account. The employee ID attached to the payout was mine. That didn't make sense. I didn't get commissions. I was salaried. I checked the timestamp. The redirect had been authorized on a Tuesday in July. I remembered that Tuesday clearly. I had been at a logistics conference in Chicago. I hadn't even logged into the system that day. I leaned back, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in the dark room. Someone had used my credentials to funnel money into an account tied to my name, but it wasn't an account I controlled. It was a shadow, a setup. Victor hadn't just sabotaged my career. He had been building a paper trail of embezzlement for months, perhaps years. He wasn't just trying to get me written out of the will. He was making sure I'd be too legally compromised to ever fight back. I looked at the one line that didn't match my memory. It was a small discrepancy, a fraction of a percent in a sea of data. To anyone else, it was a rounding error. To me, it was a fingerprint. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the need to scream or break something. I felt the strange, cold hum of a machine starting up. Victor wanted to play with timelines and reputations. He wanted to use the family business as a weapon. He thought he was the architect of my downfall. He didn't realize that I was the one who built the map, and on my map there were no shortcuts back to safety for him. I reached for my mouse and began to map out the connections. It was going to be a long night and an even longer month. I had a lot of work to do, and for the first time in years, I knew exactly where every piece of the puzzle belonged. The dinner was over, but the accounting was just beginning. The morning after the dinner felt brittle. The sun hit the kitchen tiles with a clinical brightness that made the lingering scent of expensive coffee feel like an insult. Maya was already gone. She had left a note on the island saying she had an early meeting with a client, but the handwriting was tight, the loops of the letters constricted. We were communicating in shorthand now, a series of logistical updates that bypassed anything resembling a real conversation. I sat at the table and looked at the space where she usually sat. Victor's influence wasn't just in my office. It was in the silence of my own home, a fine dust settling over everything I thought was secure. I arrived at the corporate headquarters at 8. By 8:15, my keycard failed to engage the elevator to the executive wing. I tried it twice, the red light mocking me with its steady, unblinking glow. I wasn't surprised, but the speed of it was impressive. Victor wasn't just pruning the branch, he was salted the earth. I took the stairs to the human resources floor, my footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell with a hollow, rhythmic thud. My manager, Marcus, was already waiting in a glass-walled conference room. He was a man who prided himself on being a straight shooter, which usually meant he used professional jargon to hide his lack of backbone. Today, he wouldn't even meet my eyes. He kept adjusting his watch, a heavy silver piece that looked too large for his wrist. "Caleb," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Thanks for coming in so early." "The elevator told me everything I need to know, Marcus. Let's skip the preamble." He cleared his throat, opening a leather-bound folder. "There have been inquiries regarding the Q3 shipping logs and certain discrepancies in the vendor payout files. The board is concerned about oversight, specifically your oversight." "The Q3 logs were audited in October," I said, my voice flat. "They were flawless. If there are discrepancies now, someone put them there." Marcus finally looked up, but his expression was one of pity, not malice. That was worse. It meant the lie was already accepted as fact. "The internal investigation suggests that credentials associated with your terminal were used to bypass the secondary verification protocols. It's a serious matter, Caleb. We're talking about a breach of fiduciary duty. Given your history with the firm, we're prepared to offer a resignation package. It's clean. It's quiet." "It's a frame," I said. "It's a paper trail," he countered. "And right now, that trail leads to your desk. I suggest you take the weekend to think about the offer. But as of this moment, your access to the network is suspended. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal items." The walk to my office was a masterclass in corporate erasure. Co-workers I had mentored for years suddenly found urgent business with their monitors as I passed. I saw Sarah, a junior analyst who had been my most reliable direct report, standing by the water cooler. When she saw me, she turned her back and started a conversation with someone from marketing. The isolation was immediate and total. Victor hadn't just removed me from the payroll, he had removed me from the social fabric of the company. I packed my things into a single cardboard box. It's remarkable how little a 12-year career weighs when you strip away the company-issued equipment. A stapler, a desk lamp, a framed photo of Maya and me from a vacation in Maine before the silence started. I left the company laptop on the desk, its screen dark. They thought they were cutting off my vision by taking my hardware. They didn't realize I'd been running a parallel system for years. When I got home, the house was still empty. I went to the guest bedroom, which I'd converted into a secondary workspace long ago. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dimness and opened my personal laptop. Logistics is fundamentally about the movement of mass through time. Every package has a point of origin, a destination, and a series of waypoints in between. If you know the rules of the system, you can predict where a package will be at any given second. People, I was learning, followed a similar logic. Victor had moved me. He had shifted my status from senior planner to liability. Now, I needed to see how he'd moved the money. I couldn't access the live corporate server, but I didn't need to. Every Friday for the last 5 years, I'd run a localized backup of my department's routing data to a private cloud drive. It was a redundancy measure I'd implemented after a server crash in 2019, one that the IT department had eventually forgotten about. It was a ghost in the machine, a perfect mirror of the truth before Victor started editing the reality. I pulled up the commission routing data again. I needed a timeline, no shortcuts, no guesses. I opened a blank spreadsheet and began to build a manual log. 1. July 14th. Commission payout for the Harrington account. $12,400 redirected to a holding sub-account. Authorization, my ID. Location, my office terminal. 2. July 14th. My location. Chicago O'Hare Airport, 2:14 p.m. Gate B12. I have the digital receipt for a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water. I stared at the screen. The two events occupied the same space and time but were physically impossible. I kept going. 3. August 22nd. Inventory write-off for the New Jersey hub. $45,000 in damaged luxury goods removed from the manifest. Authorization, my ID. 4. August 22nd. My location. Dental appointment for a root canal. I was under local anesthesia at the exact moment the write-off was keyed in. The pattern was beautiful in its cruelty. Victor hadn't just stolen, he had stolen when he knew I had an airtight alibi, not to protect me, but to ensure that when the discrepancies were found, it would look like I was using my absences to cover my tracks. It made it look like I was a calculated, sophisticated thief who thought he was being clever. By 3:00 a.m., my eyes were burning, the blue light of the monitor etched into my retinas. I had identified 6 major incidents of redirected funds and 4 instances of inventory leakage. All of them were tied to my credentials. All of them occurred when I was physically elsewhere. But there was a missing link. To move that much inventory and cash, Victor needed more than just my password. He needed access to the physical distribution centers. He needed someone on the inside to sign off on the damaged goods and someone to verify the redirected commissions. I pulled up Maya's social media. It was a shallow pool of curated happiness, but I wasn't looking at the photos. I was looking at the tags. There, in a photo from a charity gala 3 months ago, was Victor, smiling his wide, predatory smile. And standing next to him was the regional director of the New Jersey Distribution Center, a man named Henderson. Henderson had been a Victor loyalist for years, but he was also a man with a gambling habit that the company humored because he kept the numbers high. I looked at the date of the gala. It matched the week of the New Jersey write-off. The realization didn't hit me like a physical blow. It was more like the slow settling of a foundation. I looked at the photo again. Maya was in the frame, her hand on Victor's arm, laughing at something he'd said. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged in that world of high-stakes sales and effortless influence. Did she know? The thought was a cold weight in my chest. I didn't want to believe she was a willing participant, but I knew Victor. He didn't ask for help. He manipulated people into providing it without them even realizing they were holding the shovel. He would have told her I was struggling. He would have told her he was helping me by taking some of the workload off my plate. He would have asked for her login to the family portal to check on some insurance paperwork, and she would have given it to him because he was her brother-in-law and he was looking out for us. I stood up and paced the small room. The physical stress was starting to set in, the dull ache in my lower back, the way my hands shook slightly from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. I needed to see Henderson. I needed to see the physical reality of the fraud. The New Jersey distribution center was a 3-hour drive. If I left now, I could be there for the morning shift change. I grabbed my keys and a jacket. I didn't leave a note for Maya. There was no point in writing words that wouldn't be understood. The drive was a gray blur of highway and rain. I kept my mind on the logistics. If Henderson was the one signing off on the inventory, there would be a physical trail. Damaged luxury goods aren't just thrown away. They're supposed to be incinerated or returned to the manufacturer for credit. If they were being diverted, they had to be going somewhere. A warehouse, a third-party liquidator, or a private residence. I reached the facility at 6:30 a.m. It was a massive, windowless slab of concrete surrounded by a chain-link fence. I parked in a distant corner of the lot, away from the security cameras I had helped install. I knew the blind spots. I knew that the north gate sensor had a 5-second lag when the shift change whistle blew. I waited. At 7 a.m., the morning crew began to arrive. I saw Henderson's black SUV pull into the reserved spot near the entrance. He got out, looking tired, his suit jacket rumpled. He didn't look like a man who was getting rich. He looked like a man who was barely holding on. I slipped out of my car and moved toward the loading docks, staying low behind a row of empty shipping containers. My heart was thudding against my ribs, a dull, insistent rhythm. This wasn't my world. I was a man of spreadsheets and data flows, not industrial espionage. But Victor had changed the rules of the game, and I was finding that I had a surprising aptitude for the new terrain. I reached the edge of the dock. A truck was being loaded with Class B returns, the items marked as damaged or unsellable. I watched as 2 workers moved a pallet of high-end watches, the kind that retailed for $5,000 apiece. The manifest on the side of the pallet was bright yellow, indicating it was destined for the incineration protocol. But the truck wasn't a company vehicle. It was a plain white box truck with no markings and out-of-state plates. I pulled out my phone and took a photo. Then another. I waited until the truck pulled away, following it at a distance until it reached a small, nondescript warehouse 10 miles down the road. I sat in my car, watching the white truck disappear into the warehouse. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from Victor. "Hope you're enjoying the time off, Cal. Dad wants to finalize the paperwork on Monday. Let's try to be adults about this, okay?" I didn't reply. I opened my spreadsheet on my phone and added a new tab. Location: 1422 Industrial Way. Contents: redirected luxury inventory. Witness: me. I realized then that Victor's biggest mistake wasn't the fraud itself. It was thinking that I would follow the rules of the collapse. He expected me to go quietly, to accept the shame, and to fade into the background. He expected me to be the gear that broke and let the machine keep turning. He didn't realize that I was the one who had designed the machine, and I knew exactly which lever to pull to make the whole thing seize up. I turned the car around and began the long drive back. I had the data. I had the locations. Now, I needed to see how deep the rot went into my own house. I needed to talk to Maya, but not with words. I needed to see her files. The 3-act structure of my life was moving into the 2nd act. The investigation was over. The reconstruction was beginning. And Victor was still smiling, oblivious to the fact that his golden boy reputation was built on a foundation of digital sand that I was currently washing away, one line of code at a time. The drive back from the New Jersey warehouse was a lesson in sustained silence. I kept the radio off, letting the hum of the tires on the asphalt serve as a metronome for my thoughts. Logistics is the art of knowing where everything is, but the higher level, the executive level Victor craved, is about knowing where things are hidden. My brother had spent years looking down at me from his glass office, seeing a man who played with spreadsheets. He never realized that a spreadsheet is just a map of intent. Every cell is a choice, and every choice leaves a trail. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to a small, independent coffee shop on the edge of the city. I needed a neutral ground, a place where the air didn't feel heavy with Maya's unspoken judgments or the phantom echoes of my father's disappointment. I met Arthur, a retired financial advisor who had handled our family's secondary accounts before Victor pushed him out in favor of a high-gloss firm in the city. Arthur was 80, with eyes like flint and a memory for numbers that put modern processors to shame. He was the kind of man who still balanced a checkbook by hand. "You look like a man who has lost his compass, Caleb," Arthur said, sliding a lukewarm tea across the small wooden table. "I know exactly where I am, Arthur. I'm just looking for the ledger that explains why." I laid out the printed logs from my home server. I didn't tell him about the warehouse or the white truck. I just showed him the redirects. I showed him the commission flows that bore my name but lacked my signature. Arthur put on his spectacles, the frames thick and yellowed with age. He traced the numbers with a steady finger, his lips moving as he performed the mental math I had already confirmed with software. "These are sub-accounts," Arthur whispered, his voice raspy. "They're designed to look like escrow for regional taxes, very clever. They hold the money for 90 days, then they disperse it into a series of shell entities. Look here, at the routing numbers. These aren't domestic. They're looping through a Caribbean clearinghouse before coming back as consulting fees to a firm called VN Strategic. VN Strategic, I repeated. It wasn't hard to solve that riddle. Victor Norton. He wasn't even creative enough to change his initials. Is there a link to a physical person? On paper? No. It's managed by a blind trust. But the beneficiary is always the same. Someone who is very careful about their lifestyle appearing to match their salary while their offshore accounts swell like a tide. Arthur looked up at me, his expression grim. "This isn't just a corporate dispute, Caleb. This is a systematic hollowing out. If you bring this to your father, you aren't just bringing him a problem. You're bringing him the end of the Norton reputation." "He already ended mine," I said. "He did it over steak and Chardonnay." I thanked Arthur and left, the weight of the files in my laptop bag feeling more like a shield than a burden. I had the financial trail. Now I needed the human element. I needed to understand how Victor had convinced Maya to be his unintentional key. I waited until I knew she would be at her yoga studio, then I went back to our house. The silence in the hallway felt like a physical pressure. I went to the kitchen and looked at her tablet, which sat on the charging dock. We had always shared our passwords. It was a relic of a time when we actually trusted one another. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, not out of guilt, but out of a fear of what I would find. Then I swiped the screen. I didn't look at her messages. I didn't look at her photos. I went straight to her calendar and her email archive. I searched for Victor's name. There were dozens of entries, lunch meetings, check-ins, and a series of emails with the subject line, "Helping Caleb." I opened one from 3 months ago. "Maya," Victor had written. "Caleb is struggling with the new system integration. He's proud, and he won't ask for help, but he's making mistakes that could be very bad for his future at the firm. I've set up a mirror portal so I can quietly double-check his work and fix his errors before Dad sees them. Can you give me the remote access code from his home router? He mentions it in his notes, but I don't want to tip him off that I'm watching his back." Let's keep this our little secret. I just want him to stay safe at the company." Maya's reply was heartbreakingly simple. "Thank you, Victor. You're a lifesaver. The code is 8821X. Please don't let him know I told you. He's been so stressed lately." I sat on the kitchen stool, the tablet glowing in my hands. He had used her concern for my well-being to gain entry to my home network. He had turned my wife into his accomplice by weaponizing her love for me. It was a perfect, closed-loop system of betrayal. He hadn't just stolen my career, he had poisoned the one person who was supposed to be my witness. The physical stress I had been feeling, the tightness in my chest, the headache that had been pulsing behind my eyes since the dinner, suddenly vanished. It was replaced by a cold, analytical stillness. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about logistics. I needed to move the pieces into a position where Victor's only move would be his own undoing. I decided to follow him. I knew his schedule. Victor was a creature of habit who believed his own charisma made him invisible. Every Friday afternoon, he visited the regional distribution center under the guise of executive oversight. In reality, he was there to meet Henderson and ensure the shadow inventory was moving smoothly. I drove back to the industrial district, but this time I didn't hide in the distance. I used a rented car, a generic silver SUV that looked like 1,000 others in the city. I pulled into the visitor lot and waited. At 3 p.m., Victor's Porsche slid into the lot. He stepped out, looking every bit the rising star in his tailored suit and Italian loafers. He didn't look like a thief. He looked like the future. I watched him enter the facility through the front doors. I knew that within 20 minutes, he would move to the back offices where the security cameras had blind spots during the shift transition. I followed at a distance, entering through the employee side door using an old keycard I hadn't turned in yet. The system hadn't updated its permissions for the physical locks, a classic oversight in a company that focused on digital security while neglecting the hardware. The air in the distribution center was thick with the smell of cardboard, diesel, and floor wax. It was a familiar, comforting scent, the smell of my career. I moved through the stacks of pallets, the giant wooden towers creating a labyrinth that I knew by heart. I reached the mezzanine level, a steel walkway that overlooked the loading docks. I saw them. Victor and Henderson were standing near a pallet of high-end electronics. They weren't whispering. Victor was gesturing toward a clipboard, his face animated. He looked like he was coaching a junior athlete. Henderson looked terrified, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting toward the main floor. "It's a simple transfer, Henderson." Victor's voice drifted up, muffled by the ambient noise of the forklifts. "The paperwork reflects a loss in transit. The insurance covers the firm, and we cover ourselves. Caleb's ID is already on the digital manifest. If anyone asks, he's the one who authorized the route change." "But the audits," Henderson stammered. "If they look at the physical logs—" "They won't," Victor snapped. "Dad doesn't look at paper. He looks at me, and I'm telling him everything is fine. You just keep the trucks moving to the industrial way. I'll handle the rest." I held my breath, my back pressed against a cold steel pillar. I had a recorder in my pocket, but I didn't reach for it. I didn't need a recording that Victor's lawyers could suppress as an invasion of privacy. I needed a witness. I looked down at the floor. A young forklift operator was idling nearby, waiting for his next ticket. He was a kid I had hired a year ago, someone who appreciated the way I'd streamlined his shift hours. I knew his name, Leo. I moved quietly down the stairs and approached him. "Leo," I whispered. He jumped, his eyes widening. "Mr. Norton? I heard you were out." "I am," I said, leaning in. "But I left something in the back office near the Class B dock. I need you to do me a favor. Just drive your lift past the mezzanine office and tell me if the lights are on. Don't say anything. Don't stop. Just look." "Sure, I guess. Why?" "Just checking the energy efficiency," I said, a bitter smile touching my lips. "Go on." Leo did exactly as I asked. He rolled the heavy lift past the area where Victor and Henderson were standing. He saw them. He saw the clipboard, the unbranded truck, and the unauthorized meeting. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he was a witness. He was a data point. I slipped out of the building before Victor could turn around. The adrenaline was a dull roar in my ears, but I kept my movements controlled. I got back to the rental car and sat there, watching the building. The cliffhanger wasn't that I had caught him. The cliffhanger was the realization of how deep the hole was. Victor wasn't just stealing inventory. He was using the firm's own insurance policies to double dip on the losses. He was a parasite that had convinced the host it was a vital organ. I drove home, my mind racing. I had the financial records, the emails to Maya, and now a physical witness to the shadow logistics. But I knew my father. He wouldn't believe a spreadsheet, and he wouldn't believe a forklift operator over his favorite son. He needed a confrontation. He needed to see the mask slip in a way that couldn't be ignored. When I walked into my house, Maya was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water. She looked up, her face pale. "Caleb, where have you been?" Victor called. "He said you were acting strangely today. He said you showed up at the office and tried to take some files." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I had married. I saw a pawn. And I realized that if I was going to win this, I had to stop trying to protect her from the truth. "Victor is right about one thing, Maya," I said, my voice steady. "I am acting differently. Because I've finally stopped looking at the links and started looking at the person who owns the chain." "What are you talking about?" she asked, her hand trembling. "I'm talking about a meeting," I said. "On Monday. I've already sent the invite to Dad, Victor, and the firm's lead advisor. We're going to discuss the future of Norton Luxury Retail, and you're going to be there." "Caleb, you're scaring me." "Good," I said, "because the world Victor built for us is a lie, and it's about to get very crowded in the wreckage." I walked past her to my office and closed the door. I had 48 hours to prepare the final manifest. The logistics of revenge required a level of precision I had never used before. Every piece had to be in place. Every witness had to be ready. And Victor, in his arrogance, wouldn't see the delivery coming until it was already signed for. The conference room on the 42nd floor was a vacuum of sound and color. It was designed to project an image of absolute stability. Heavy oak tables, slate gray carpeting, and floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the city like a watchtower. My father sat at the head of the table, his posture as rigid as the corporate bylaws he lived by. Victor was to his right, looking relaxed, one hand draped over the back of an empty chair, the other tapping a rhythmic beat on a leather portfolio. He looked like a man attending a victory parade he had organized for himself. Maya sat next to me. She was dressed in a sharp navy suit, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken to me since Friday night, moving through the house like a ghost in a place she no longer recognized. To her left sat Arthur, whom I had invited as a neutral observer with historical context. At the far end of the table was Sarah Jennings, the firm's senior financial advisor, a woman who treated numbers with the reverence of a surgeon. "This is highly unusual, Caleb," my father began, his voice echoing in the sterile space. "A family meeting in the executive suite on a Monday morning? We have a schedule to maintain. Victor tells me you've been erratic. If this is about your performance review, there are channels for that." "This isn't about my performance, Dad," I said. I stood up and walked to the digital display at the front of the room. I felt a strange sense of detachment, a coolness that was almost mechanical. "It's about the structural integrity of the firm. We talk a lot about the Norton legacy. Today, I'd like to look at the Norton reality." Victor laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Here we go. The logistics guy wants to talk about reality, because he can't handle a little corporate restructuring. Dad, we don't have time for a slideshow." "Let him speak, Victor," Sarah said quietly. She was already looking at the first document I had pulled up on the screen. It was a simple flowchart showing the commission structures for the Harrington account. "This is a standard payout," I said, pointing to the figures. $12,000. Verified, processed, and deposited. The records show it went to my employee account while I was in Chicago. "We've been over this, Caleb," Victor said, leaning back. "You were caught with your hand in the till. The ID matches, the terminal matches. It's unfortunate, but it's documented." "I agree," I said, looking directly at him. "It is very well documented. Too well, actually. If I were going to steal from the company, I wouldn't use my own login from my own office while I was 1,000 miles away. I'm a logistics planner, Victor. I manage complex systems. I don't leave neon signs pointing to my own front door." I swiped the screen to the next slide. It was the email Victor had sent to Maya, the one asking for my home router access code. Maya made a small, choked sound in her throat. My father leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he read the text. "Victor?" my father asked, his voice dropping an octave. "I was trying to help him," Victor snapped, his composure flickering for the first time. "He was falling apart, Dad. I needed to see what he was doing so I could fix his mistakes before the board saw them. I was protecting the family name." "By using a backdoor entrance to bypass corporate security protocols?" Sarah Jennings asked, her pen hovering over a notepad. "That's a violation of 3 different internal policies, Victor. Even if the intent was benign, the method is a liability." "The intent wasn't benign," I said. I pulled up the secondary ledger Arthur and I had analyzed. While Victor was protecting me, he was using that access to route funds into a holding account. That account is tied to a shell entity called VN Strategic. "Sarah, have you ever heard of that firm?" Sarah looked at the routing numbers I'd provided. She began typing rapidly on her laptop. The room went silent, the only sound the clicking of her keys and the hum of the air conditioning. Victor's foot stopped tapping. He was staring at the screen, his face turning a shade of pale that made his expensive tan look like a mask. "VN. Strategic is not on our approved vendor list," Sarah said, her voice clinical. "But these routing numbers, they match a series of consulting fees we've been paying out for the last 18 months. Fees authorized by the sales department." "It's a subsidiary!" Victor shouted, standing up so quickly his chair hit the glass wall behind him. "It's a perfectly legal vehicle for tax optimization. Caleb is cherry-picking data to make it look like something it isn't. He's bitter because he's being phased out, and he's trying to take me down with him." "Then explain the white truck," I said. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of a pause, it was the silence of a vacuum. "What truck?" my father asked. I pulled up the photos I had taken at the New Jersey warehouse, the pallets of high-end watches, the yellow tags for the incineration protocol, the unbranded box truck, and finally, the photo of Victor and Henderson standing on the loading dock, the clipboard clearly visible between them. "This inventory was marked as damaged in transit," I explained. "The insurance claims were filed and paid out to Norton Luxury Retail, but the inventory didn't go to the incinerator. It went to a warehouse on Industrial Way, a warehouse leased by VN Strategic. Victor isn't just stealing commissions. He's stealing the product, getting the insurance company to cover the loss, and then selling the supposedly written-off stock through third-party liquidators." My father looked at the photo of Victor on the dock. He looked at it for a long time, his face unreadable. He looked like a man watching a skyscraper he had built start to crumble from the inside out. "Victor," he said softly, "tell me there's a reason you were at that facility on a Friday afternoon without a scheduled inspection." I was checking on Henderson," Victor stammered. The charisma was gone, replaced by a raw, frantic energy. "He called me. He was confused about the protocol. I was just providing executive oversight, Dad. You know how the logistics guys get bogged down in the details. I was making a call." "A call to a private warehouse?" I asked. "I have the lease agreement, Victor. I found it in the public records for the county. The primary contact for the lease isn't VN Strategic. It's an individual named Marcus Henderson, the same Henderson who is currently running our New Jersey hub. The logic was closing in on him. It was a pincer movement of data and physical evidence. Victor looked around the room, searching for an exit, an ally, a way to spin the narrative. He looked at Maya, but she looked away, her face buried in her hands. He looked at Sarah, but she was already making a phone call to the internal audit team. Finally, he looked at my father. "Dad, listen to me. This is all it's a misunderstanding of the scale. I was trying to build a reserve, a safety net for when the market shifts. You've always said we need to be prepared for the lean years. I was just securing our interests." "Our interests?" my father asked. "Or yours?" The door opened, and a junior associate walked in, looking hesitant. He handed a single sheet of paper to Sarah Jennings. She read it, then slid it across the table to my father. "What is this?" my father asked. "It's a wire transfer notification from this morning," Sarah said, her voice as cold as ice. "At 7:05 a.m., an attempt was made to move $3 million from the firm's secondary reserve account to an offshore clearinghouse. The authorization used an executive override code." Everyone looked at Victor. "I was moving the funds for the Q4 acquisition," Victor screamed. "I told you we needed to be liquid for the expansion." "The expansion was tabled 2 weeks ago," my father said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound disappointment. "I told you that myself, Victor, in this very room." "The transfer was blocked," Sarah added. "The system flagged it, because the recipient account was already on a watch list provided by our bank's fraud division. They've been tracking VN Strategic for 3 months, Mr. Norton. They were just waiting for a direct link to a Norton executive to freeze everything." Victor sank back into his chair. He looked smaller, the suit suddenly appearing several sizes too large for him. The air of the golden boy had evaporated, leaving behind a man who had gambled everything on the assumption that no one was smart enough to check his math. The room was silent for a full minute. I sat down, the adrenaline finally starting to recede. I felt no joy in it, only a grim sense of completion. The logistics had been handled. The delivery had been made. "Sarah," my father said, his voice regaining its command. "Initiate a full forensic audit of the sales department, effective immediately. Call legal. I want every contract Victor has touched in the last 2 years reviewed by outside counsel." "Yes, sir." "And Victor," my father said, looking at his eldest son with a look of pure, unadulterated coldness. "Leave. Leave the building. Leave your keys with security. Do not go to your office. Do not contact any of our clients. If I see your name on a company document again, I will ensure that the authorities are given every single page of what Caleb has found today." Victor looked up, a wild, desperate light in his eyes. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the brother I used to look up to, the one who taught me how to throw a baseball. Then the mask settled back into place, a mask of pure, concentrated hatred. "You think this ends here?" Victor hissed, leaning across the table toward me. "You think you can just show a few slides and take my life? You have no idea what I've built, Caleb. You have no idea how many people are invested in my success. You've won a meeting. Congratulations. But outside this room, nobody cares about your spreadsheets. They care about who can make the money. And that's not you. It will never be you." He stood up, adjusted his tie, and walked toward the door. He stopped and looked at Maya. "I'm sorry you're married to a man who spends his life lurking in the shadows, Maya. You deserved better than a snitch." He slammed the door behind him. The silence that followed was heavy. Maya stood up and walked out without a word, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Arthur patted my hand and stood to follow her, leaving me alone with my father and Sarah. "Caleb," my father said, not looking at me. I didn't see it." "You weren't looking, Dad. You were looking at the optics. I was looking at the gears." "We have a lot of work to do," he said, finally meeting my eyes. There was no apology in them, men like him don't apologize, but there was a new kind of recognition. A realization that the foundation he thought was rotting was actually the only thing holding the building up. "The board meeting is in 3 hours. I need you to lead the presentation on the audit findings." "I'm unemployed, remember?" I said. "Marcus gave me the weekend to think about my resignation." My father waved a hand as if brushing away a fly. "Marcus is a fool. Your access is restored. I'll handle the paperwork. Just get the data ready." He walked out, leaving me in the glass tower. I looked out at the city, at the thousands of moving parts, the trucks and the ships and the people, all flowing through a system that most of them didn't understand. Victor was wrong. This didn't end with a meeting. It ended with the consequences. He thought he could outrun the truth because he was faster, but he forgot that the truth doesn't have to run. It just has to be there when you finally stop. I opened my laptop and began to prepare the final report. I had won the battle, but Victor's parting words stayed with me. "You have no idea what I've built." Logistically speaking, a cornered animal is the most dangerous variable in any system. I needed to make sure that when Victor tried to strike back, there was nothing left for him to hit. The aftermath of the meeting was not a quiet retreat. Victor did not go into the night like a defeated soldier. He went into the city like a man who intended to burn his bridges while he was still standing on them. By Tuesday morning, the whispers had begun. I sat in my restored office, the silence of the executive floor feeling more like a vacuum than a sanctuary. The internal phone line chimed every 10 minutes, calls from department heads who had heard rumors about a family dispute, calls from vendors wondering if their contracts were still valid, and most pointedly, calls from people I had known for a decade who now spoke to me with a cautious, distant formality. Victor was playing his final hand, social and professional destruction. If he couldn't own the company, he would ensure that the man running the audit was viewed as a parricide. I received an alert on my personal phone, a link to a local business blog with a high-profile following. The headline was a masterpiece of strategic ambiguity. Internal power struggle at Norton Luxury, allegations of sabotage and family betrayal. The article didn't name me directly, but it spoke of a disgruntled younger sibling who had manufactured evidence to seize control of the firm's logistics pipeline. He was fast. I had to give him that. He was using the very thing I lacked, a network of influencers, golf course buddies, and regional editors who preferred a dramatic story of sibling rivalry over a dry report on commission redirects. I looked at the screen, my face illuminated by the harsh white light of the monitor. He thought he was winning the war of words. He didn't realize that in my world, words are just labels on a container. They don't change the contents. I spent the morning not on the phone, but in the server room. I wasn't looking for Victor anymore. I was looking for the people he was talking to. I ran a cross-reference of the executive phone logs from Victor's final hour in the building against the names mentioned in the blog post. I found 4 calls to a prominent local publicist and a series of encrypted messages sent to a private investigator firm. Victor was trying to build a counter-narrative. He was planning to claim that I had been the one diverting the funds all along, and that I had planted the evidence on his terminal after hacking his system via the home router code he had innocently asked Maya for. It was a clever inversion of the truth. It turned his theft into a rescue mission and my evidence into a fabrication. I needed to move, not defensively, but logistically. I left the office at noon and drove to a small park near the city center. I had arranged to meet Maya. She was sitting on a bench, her coat pulled tight against the wind. She looked smaller than she had on Monday, the confidence she usually wore like armor having been stripped away by the realization that her life had been a series of manufactured moments. "He's telling people you're a monster, Caleb," she said without looking at me. "He called me this morning. He said he has proof that you were the one who set up the VN strategic accounts. He said you used his initials to make it look like him if you ever got caught. And do you believe him? I asked. She finally looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. I don't know what to believe. I look at you and I see a man who has been obsessing over spreadsheets for a week. I look at him and I see the person who has been helping our family for years. But then I remember the email about the router. He lied to me, Caleb. He used me. He used everyone, I said quietly. But he made a mistake. He thinks that because he controls the conversation, he controls the outcome. But conversations aren't data. They're just noise. I handed her a small USB drive. I need you to do something. Victor is going to ask you to testify or sign a statement for his lawyers. He's going to tell you it's the only way to save the family. I want you to tell him you'll do it, but only if he meets you in person at the old house. No lawyers, no fathers, just you and him. Why? Because he's going to try to coach you, I said. He's going to tell you exactly what he did and how he did it, so you can remember it differently. And when he does, he's going to provide the one thing I don't have yet. A confession of intent. You want me to record him? He'll check for a phone, Caleb. He's not stupid. I don't want you to record him, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I want you to be the witness. I've already arranged for a third party to be present. Someone he won't see. Someone who has been waiting for a reason to cancel his contracts. The third party was the lead investigator from the firm's insurance provider. They had been paying out loss claims for 2 years based on Victor's reports. If they found out they had been defrauded by an executive, they wouldn't just fire him. They would claw back every cent, plus damages. Maya took the drive. What's on here? The truth, I said. The actual logs, the timestamps of his logins. Show it to him. Tell him you found it on my computer and you're scared. He'll think he can use it to frame me. He'll get arrogant. And when Victor gets arrogant, he stops looking at the shadows. I watched her walk away, a solitary figure in the gray afternoon. I felt a pang of something, regret, perhaps, but I pushed it down. There was no room for sentiment in the final stages of a delivery. That evening, I went to Victor's apartment. It was a glass and steel penthouse that screamed of the status he had stolen from the firm. I didn't knock. I used the emergency maintenance code I had retrieved from the building's logistics manager, a man who owed me a favor from 3 years ago. The elevator opened directly into the living room. Victor was standing by the window, a drink in his hand, looking out at the city he thought he owned. He didn't turn around when he heard the chime. I figured you'd show up, he said, his voice thick with a forced bravado. Come to ask for mercy, or are you here to tell me you found another spreadsheet? I'm here to tell you it's over, Victor. The blog posts, the rumors, the calls to the publicists, it's just friction. It slows things down, but it doesn't stop the momentum. He turned then, his face contorted with a sneer. You think you're so smart, don't you? The quiet little brother with his numbers. You have no idea how the world works, Caleb. People believe what they want to believe. And they want to believe that the successful, charismatic executive was framed by his jealous, boring brother. I've already got 3 board members questioning Dad's decision to let you run the audit. The board members won't matter when the insurance company files for recovery of the $3 million, I said, walking to the center of the room. And they definitely won't matter when the Internal Revenue Service starts looking at VN Strategic. Victor laughed, but it was a hollow sound. He set his glass down on a marble table with a sharp clack. You have nothing. You have some logs that any decent IT guy could have faked. You're a non-entity, Caleb. You're a ghost in your own life. I stepped closer to him. I was shorter than Victor, less athletic, less imposing. But in that moment, I felt like the heaviest object in the room. I'm the man who knows where every single box in this company is located, Victor. I know where you hid the inventory. I know which truck moved it. And I know which account paid for the fuel. Victor's face flushed. He took a step toward me, his hand balling into a fist. For a second, I thought he might actually strike me. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Physicality was his only remaining weapon, and using it would only accelerate his collapse. "Get out!" he hissed. "Get out before I have security throw you off the balcony." "Security is already downstairs, Victor," I said calmly. "But they aren't here for me. They're here to ensure that you don't remove any personal items that might actually belong to the firm. The apartment is leased through the company, remember? Your access was revoked an hour ago." The look of pure, impotent rage that crossed his face was more satisfying than any spreadsheet I had ever produced. He realized then that I wasn't fighting him for the family's affection or the company's future. I was simply executing a series of commands that had been set in motion the moment he decided to lie to my father at that dinner. "You're nothing," he whispered. "You're a pencil pusher who got lucky." "Logistics isn't luck, Victor," I said, turning to the elevator. "It's the elimination of luck. It's the certainty that every action has a recorded consequence." I left him standing in the middle of his stolen palace, the lights of the city flickering behind him like the fading embers of a fire. As the elevator descended, I checked my phone. I had a message from Maya. "He's meeting me tomorrow at 10 a.m. He sounds desperate. He said he has a plan to fix everything." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The final movement of the piece was in progress. Victor thought he was going to fix his problem by manipulating Maya one last time. He didn't realize that he was walking into a room that had been monitored, audited, and secured before he even knew the meeting existed. The re-hook was simple. Victor believed he was the one setting the trap. He believed his charisma was a shield that could deflect any data point. But as I walked out into the cool night air, I knew the one thing Victor had never learned. A shadow can't fight the light, but it can certainly be erased by it. I sat in my car and watched the penthouse lights. One by one, they began to go out as the building's automated systems I had helped integrate, began to shut down the unauthorized zones. Victor was sitting in the dark, and for the first time in his life, he had no one to blame but the man in the mirror. The final confrontation was coming. The will, the company, the family name, it all came down to the next 12 hours. And I had already calculated the margin of error. It was 0. The morning of the final meeting arrived with a heavy, gray fog that clung to the windows of my father's estate. This was the house where Victor and I had grown up, a sprawling colonial structure that had always felt more like a museum of my father's achievements than a home. It was the place where the original dinner had taken place, the setting for the betrayal that had set this entire sequence in motion. Now, it was the location where the cycle would conclude. I arrived early, but I didn't go inside. I sat in my car at the end of the long gravel driveway, watching the digital feed on my tablet. The insurance investigator, a man named Sterling with 30 years of experience in corporate fraud, was already in position in the library. He was tucked away in a small alcove behind the heavy velvet curtains, equipped with a high-fidelity audio receiver. Maya was in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she arranged a tray of tea that no one would drink. At 9:55 a.m., Victor's Porsche roared up the drive. He didn't park in his usual spot. He left the car idling at an angle, the engine humming with a restless mechanical energy that matched his own. He looked disheveled. His hair wasn't perfectly styled, and his suit was the same one he had worn the day before, now creased at the elbows. He looked like a man who had spent the night pacing a cage of his own making. I waited until he entered the house before I stepped out of my car. I didn't enter through the front door. I walked around to the side entrance, moving through the mudroom and into the hallway that led to the library. I could hear their voices, the sharp, frantic edge of Victor's tone and the soft, hesitant responses from Maya. "You have to understand, Maya," Victor was saying, his voice echoing off the mahogany bookshelves. "Caleb isn't thinking clearly. He's obsessed with these spreadsheets because he's always felt overlooked. He's trying to punish us. He's trying to punish Dad for being successful and you for being happy. He has the logs, Victor, Maya said. I could hear the clink of a spoon against a saucer. He showed me the timestamps. He knows about the warehouse in New Jersey. The warehouse was a temporary storage solution, Victor shouted. There was a thud, the sound of a fist hitting a table. I was protecting the inventory from a faulty sprinkler system at the hub. If I hadn't moved it, we would have lost millions in water damage. Caleb is twisting a responsible executive decision into a crime because he doesn't understand the pressures of the top floor. Then why were the insurance claims filed? Maya asked. Her voice was stronger now, bolstered by the truth she had been carrying like a weight. If the inventory was safe in your warehouse, why did the firm claim it was a total loss? There was a long silence. I could imagine Victor's face, the calculation, the narrowing of the eyes, the search for a new lie that could cover the old one. Because the company needed the liquidity, Victor said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial hum. Dad knew. He didn't say it in so many words, but he knew. We were overextended on the Florida expansion. I took the initiative to ensure the Norton name stayed on the marquee. I did it for the family, Maya. And now Caleb is using it to destroy the very legacy he claims to care about. I need you to tell the investigators that Caleb was the one who suggested the move. Tell them he was the one who managed the logistics of the private warehouse. If you do that, the insurance company will back off and we can handle this internally. You want me to lie for you, she said. I want you to protect your life, Victor snapped. If the company goes under because of a fraud investigation, what happens to your lifestyle? What happens to this house? Caleb is a martyr, Maya. He'll go down with the ship just to prove he was right. I'm the one offering you a life raft. I pushed the library doors open. Victor spun around, his face a mask of shock that quickly curdled into fury. He looked at me, then at Maya, then at the heavy curtains where Sterling was now stepping out, his digital recorder held visible in his hand. What is this? Victor hissed. It's a verification of intent, Victor, I said. I walked to the center of the room, stopping just a few feet from him. You just admitted to insurance fraud, witness tampering, and a conspiracy to embezzle funds from the family estate, all on a clear, high-resolution recording. Sterling nodded to me. Mr. Norton, I have everything I need. The insurance firm will be initiating a formal recovery action by noon. Given the admission of intentional diversion, the liability rests solely on you, not the corporation. Victor's face went pale. He looked at the recorder, then back at me. He looked smaller in the shadows of the library, the light of the morning sun cutting through the fog to illuminate the dust motes dancing around his head. You think you're a hero? Victor asked, his voice trembling. You've destroyed the family, Caleb. Dad will never recover from the scandal. You've burned the house down to catch a mouse. The house was already burning, Victor, I said. You were just the one holding the match. I'm the one who ensured the fire didn't spread to the neighbors. My father walked in then. He had been listening from the study, a silent witness to his eldest son's confession. He looked old. The rigidity I had admired my whole life had softened into a weary, heavy, slumped-over posture. He looked at Victor with a profound sense of mourning, as if he were seeing a stranger inhabiting his son's body. Dad, Victor started, his voice cracking. It's not what it sounds like. I can explain the numbers. I can fix the accounts. The accounts are closed, Victor, my father said. He didn't look angry. He looked finished. I've spent 40 years building a name that stood for something. You used that name as a credit card. You treated the legacy like an ATM. I was prepared to leave you everything because I thought you were the one who understood the value of what we built. I was wrong. I was blinded by the noise you made. My father turned to me. Caleb has the records. He has the plan for the restructuring. You will sign the surrender of your shares, and the resignation of your position today. If you don't, I will personally hand this recording to the district attorney. You will leave this house, and you will not return." "You can't do that," Victor whispered. "I'm your son." "I have only one son who respects the work," my father said. Victor looked at each of us in turn. He looked at Maya, but she was looking at the floor, her face set in a hard, determined line. He looked at Sterling, who was already on his phone, likely notifying the legal team at the insurance firm. Finally, he looked at me. There was no charisma left, no executive polish. There was only a raw, naked resentment. He walked past me, his shoulder glancing off mine. He didn't say a word. He walked out of the library, through the hallway, and out the front door. A moment later, the sound of the Porsche's engine roared to life, the tires spitting gravel as he sped away from the estate for the last time. The room was silent. Maya sat down in one of the leather armchairs, her face buried in her hands. Sterling excused himself to wait in the foyer. I was left standing with my father. "He's gone," my father said. It wasn't a question. "The logistics of the transition are already in place, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "The audit will be completed by Friday. We'll settle with the insurance firm out of the private reserves. The company will take a hit, but we'll survive. I've already contacted the regional hubs. They're standing by for new instructions." My father nodded slowly. He walked over to his desk and sat down. He looked at the empty chair where Victor usually sat during their private meetings. "I thought I was the one in control, Caleb. I thought I knew exactly where the cracks were." "You were looking at the architecture, Dad. I was looking at the load-bearing walls." I stayed at the house for another hour, finalizing the paperwork with Sarah Jennings, who had arrived with a team of lawyers. We worked in silence, the only sound the scratching of pens and the hum of laptops. The scandal would be contained, the fraud mitigated, and the name preserved. But the family was different. The links in the chain had been broken and reforged into something harder, colder, and more functional. When I finally left, the fog had lifted. The sun was out, reflecting off the damp leaves of the oaks that lined the driveway. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, looking at the house. I thought about the dinner where this had all begun. I thought about Victor's laugh and the way I had felt like a shadow in my own life. I checked my email one last time. A message from the corporate headquarters. "Access levels updated. Senior Executive Operations. Caleb Norton. Pending board approval." I wasn't happy. Happiness is a variable I don't know how to track. But I was satisfied. The system was back in balance. The cargo had reached its destination, and the manifests were clear. As I drove down the driveway, I saw a black SUV parked at the gate. It was Henderson. He looked at me as I passed, his face filled with a terrified, frantic uncertainty. He knew the audit was coming for him next. He knew that the man who had ignored the details was gone, replaced by the man who lived in them. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept driving, the road ahead clear and straight. Victor would find a new way to exist, no doubt. Men like him always find a new room to fill with noise, but he would never fill this one again. He would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if the next person he met was a witness I had already briefed. He would realize that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a weapon or a prison. It's a man who has your full history documented and the patience to wait for the accounting. I reached the main road and merged into the flow of traffic.